Hi, I'm Mark McVeigh from Liberty University. My presentation today is on Andrew Carnegie, the living embodiment of Horatio Alger's story. Andrew Carnegie was a philanthropist, an entrepreneur, an immigrant, and maybe one of the world's first objectivists. For reference, the picture on the lower left is the Carnegie Library in Spokane, Washington, one of the many donations that Carnegie made to different municipalities throughout the country. Carnegie was himself the victim of Schumpeter's destructive capitalism. His father lost his job as a hand loom weaver to a new steam-powered loom weaver in Scotland. In search of a new life, the family headed west to America, and apparently Andrew's father would sing, "To the west, to the land of the free, where the mighty Missouri rolls down to the sea, where a man is a man, even though he must toil, and the poorest may gather the fruits of the soil." As a young man, Carnegie organized his family finances, worked hard, and advanced rapidly in his career. He saved and invested, first in sleeping cars, then the Columbia Oil Company, then a bridge construction firm, and finally in the steel industry. He excelled at sales and management. By the early 1900s, his company, Carnegie Steel, became an acquisition target by the newly formed United States Steel Corporation. And when he sold, he became perhaps the world's wealthiest man. For reference, again, the picture on the upper right is another Andrew Carnegie donated library in Spokane, Washington. That's more on the north side, Gonzaga University area of the city. In our readings of Colco, he points out that the great trusts were created coming out of the Gilded Age were never really very close to being monopolies. Not Standard Oil, nor U.S. Steel. Historians spend a lot of time criticizing the business leaders of the area, referring to them as robber barons and suggesting that men like Carnegie took from the workers in order to enrich themselves. Carnegie felt strongly that it was natural for some men to excel while others would flounder. Unfortunately, collective ownership or the equitable distribution that a lot of these historians or people that write about that era suggest do not actually improve the lot of the individual for more than a fleeting second. Looking back at the tragedy of the commons demonstrates that collective ownership and management of an asset generally fails to accomplish the intended goal. Carnegie put his money where his mouth was, though. He was willing to talk about what he believed in and was willing to write about what he believed in. In his most well-known essay, The Gospel of Wealth, Carnegie pointed out that although the Industrial Revolution had created a very wealthy class, everybody had benefited from the Industrial Revolution. Products that used to take months to produce could now be had in moments. And he pointed out that men were no longer tied to the dirt in order to survive. They actually could save. They could move up in the world. So much was possible now. And I think that's a real big part of Carnegie's philosophy of life there. He also really believed that, here's something that's interesting, is said, under the law of competition, the employer of thousands is forced into the strictest economies, among which the rates paid to labor figure prominently, and often there is friction between the employer and the employed, between capital and labor, between rich and poor. Human society loses homogeneity. In other words, there are different classes that arise because of the inevitable march of progress. But he really believed that it was progress. He believed in the survival of the fittest, which I think is really very interesting. And he definitely had thoughts about socialists and anarchists. He wrote, "The socialist or anarchist who seeks to overturn present conditions is to be regarded as attacking the foundation upon which civilization itself rests. For civilization took its start from the day that the capable, industrious workman said to his incompetent and lazy fellow, 'If thou dost not sow, thou shalt not reap.'" and thus ended primitive communism. I think that's just a real interesting way to look at it. And Carnegie also, as a philanthropist, thought very strongly about how you should give money. And I think it's really interesting. I think he would be very disappointed in a lot of what we see today, just providing housing for people who are not necessarily willing to work, or that say they can't work, or just, a guaranteed universal income or something like that. One of my favorite comments from Carnegie here actually comes from, this is of course in his essay, It is a Waste of Time to Criticize the Inevitable, which I was just reading from. He says, in bestowing charity, the main consideration should be to help those who will help themselves. In other words, help somebody that we can invest in that's going to actually pull themselves out of poverty if you give them some help. I think that's pretty interesting. And I'll leave that there with our discussion of Carnegie. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.